Patrick McDade is the founder and program director for People, Places, Things, Intercultural Communication Services, and he is committed to using his privilege to redistribute social equity.
I knew I was Polish. I knew that because it was weird. My mom told me my family had a lot of Polish, and I told someone else, and pretty soon that's what I was. I was a weird Polak who hung around with girls and used big words. The process of discovering my whiteness and how deep it goes and how unconscious it is has been long and meandering. It's about the assumption that white is normal. It's about the deck being stacked. Something I've learned about my whiteness, it's slippery. People get confused about racism.
How could racism possibly have created such rifts between people?
Try calling white people white. One of the things that will happen is that a lot of white people will call you racist. What's really going on is they want you to protect them from never having to think about race. That's protecting their privilege. The privilege to walk through life whistling and not having to think about it. I have a white friend who said to me one time, "How often do you think about your race?" I told her maybe 3-4 times a week. I thought I was being honest with myself, admitting that I sometimes think about race. Then she said, "See that black guy over there? How often do you think he thinks about race?" Most white people are no longer white supremacists, but still believe they are superior. In order to not be white superior, you have to recognize that there's an assumption that whiteness is normal. And you have to commit to ending it, not just pretend it isn't there. The piece that I wrote is actually about an imaginary epiphany. It's called How I Became White, thinking as if there were one day where I suddenly realized it. And it's not completely false, at least the way I told the story, but I feel like it's a series of sort of epiphanies about it. What's most important to me right now is that I'm listening to lots of folks of color who said, you know, we're tired of educating you guys. Can you please do some of that yourself? At some point, hearing that enough times brought me to a place where I felt like, so what would it look like for me to be educating other white people? And that's where I find myself painted into an uncomfortable corner, standing on stage here. I have a little bit different feeling, which isn't intended to negate necessarily anybody else's ideas, but I think there is nothing redemptive about the history of whiteness per se. I do think we have to look at it. But if I think about my ethnic heritage and the stories that I know or my family has forgotten, for me that's separate from the construction of whiteness, which is a thing that was made and a thing that can be unmade. Just like my presentation as a male, though it's not perfect to match oppressions in that way, is constructed around me, and I don't think we need to necessarily hold on to it or be proud of whiteness per se, but I can say, hey, you know, my grandmother came from Poland, or my great-great-grandmother, and I can appreciate that, but not because she's white, and not even because she's European, but just because she has a story to tell. And so for me, my project is to completely dismantle the concept of whiteness, which won't happen in our time frame, but that's the only way I can have any logic about it. Working with folks from the Middle East on the census form, oftentimes there's no real space to mark yourself as a race or ethnicity. And having talked to a few folks, they mark white, and having found after a few years that they were not treated perhaps the same way that I would be. So that's part of a real experience of how the categories are chopped up. My own personal experience, I was in Belize. The opportunity for me to go to Belize is part of the privileges that I have from being from this system. But that was the first time I realized that I wasn't white, though not the way that you are in the United States if you're white here. What I mean by that is that having spent a lot of time in Latin America, I was spending time talking to dark-skinned folks from the Caribbean who spoke English, and I felt none of the weirdness that I feel here, no matter how good my intentions are when I'm interacting with African Americans here. I feel like it's in the air. I feel like it's in the water. It's not something we're just good enough to make go away. It has to be systematically deconstructed.